And that concludes my remarks. Thank you. All right, so I'll get into
One more question.
Yes, sir.
No, I think about it.
So what I put together, Joe told me I had to talk for 16 hours. So I put together some material. One of the things in the last year, working on the insurance product, and President Zippy Duvall, American Farm Bureau president, put together a Farm Bill working group in 2016. So in part of those efforts, I traveled the country all last year. I talked to dairy farmers, I talked to cotton producers, grain guys in the Midwest, pork, cattle, the whole barnyard. But I did talk a lot to dairy farmers. And so kind of what I have here is just kind of some of my observations from around the country, what I've heard when I've sat in different dairy committees, different Farm Bureau dairy committees across the country. What are some of the top challenges that we're dealing with as an industry? I don't have the answers to a lot of these questions, but these are all very important questions to think about as an industry moving forward. So I'm going to cover a lot of different issues. One of them that's not in here, that's probably one of the biggest issues, is reg reform, regulatory relief. Farmers and ranchers have a lot of regulations on them from a lot of different places, a lot of different agencies. In January, President Trump and Secretary Sonny Perdue did come to our convention in Nashville. And one of the things that he said, and one of the things that we've been working with the administration and the EPA and USDA, is trying to identify areas of regulation that are overburdensome for farmers and ranchers, and trying to get some sort of regulatory relief. One of those being waters of the U.S. That's a very, very controversial issue for farmers and ranchers. We've been working with EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt in between his rentals of cheap DC housing. We've been working with him to try to get waters of the U.S. Repealed and replaced with a little bit more common sense reform. But one of the things that President Trump said when he got to convention was, when I came in, I directed my administration, for every new regulation that we put on, we need to take off 2. Do you guys remember that? What's actually happened, this is very impressive, for every new regulation that they've added, they've taken back 22. So we continue to work with USDA and other agencies to try to find areas where we can get more regulatory relief. I know in the Farm Bill, Senator Pat Roberts on the Senate Ag Committee, one of the things that he's asked us to do is can you help surface some regulatory issues that we can address in the Farm Bill? I know that's where the Senate is thinking in the Farm Bill, trying to find ways to provide some regulatory relief, reduce the transaction costs of farming. And so that's something that we've been working with them. I'll give you another example. In the omnibus package, a couple weeks ago, they repealed the requirement for farmers to have SAMs and DUNS numbers. That's a big deal, and we lobbied for a very, very long time to try to get that to happen. I'll tell you that they didn't do it right, is what the folks on the House side are telling me, and they just fixed it in their version of the Farm Bill. But that's the kind of regulatory relief that we're talking about to try to help farmers and ranchers, getting rid of that kind of stuff. And we'll continue to work with folks in Washington, D.C. In that space. And so that's one of the challenges that I've heard from farmers across the country, from all types of farmers. I didn't have a slide on it in here, but I thought I'd highlight that just right out of the bat. It's something that Farm Bureau continues to do. And traditionally, American Farm Bureau, we've generally covered some of these really big issues, but the last couple years working on the Farm Bill Working Group gave us an opportunity, building this dairy insurance product, gave us an opportunity to come down and really analyze some of these dairy issues. And as an example of that, it was Farm Bureau that wrote a letter to the USDA after all those producers got dropped. It was all the state farm bureaus from all over the South in Ohio, Pennsylvania that said, hey, we've got an issue here. We need to come in and talk about what's happening. And so we've got state farm bureau presidents coming in next week from some of the biggest states to sit down with USDA undersecretaries to eyeball and see if we can find any solutions. And I'll tell you right now, one of the first things that we're going to ask about is what we can do on Section 32. Is there anything that we can do through that USDA because Congress gave USDA the tools through Section 32 funding to try to provide some relief. Right now, they're talking about Section 32 monies in the event of any type of trade issues that may arise, but we did use Section 32 monies in 2016 for cheese purchases, so we will request USDA to see if there's anything that can be done with those monies. The omnibus package that we passed a couple weeks ago did provide some additional financial support to the Secretary to use those funds. We'll see ultimately what kind of creative things the administration can do. But Farm Bureau, we're trying to take a very active lead in visiting with USDA and informing them of some of the issues that our folks are facing. With that, I think one of the things that, 2 years ago when I joined Farm Bureau, matter of fact, 3 or 4 years ago when I was on the Senate Ag Committee working on the Farm Bill, we had record milk prices in 2014. We had $4 or $5 corn. We had $13 soybeans. Wheat was over $5 or $6 a bushel. And anybody that was working on the Farm Bill, they were telling folks, we're never going to see corn below $4. We're not going to have milk prices fall below $11. No one saw what ultimately came at us in 2015 and 2016. And so since 2013, since 2014, net farm income across the United States for all of agriculture has dropped by more than 50%, 52%, $64 billion in farm profitability has come out of the farm economy in just a few years. And so, again, I joined Farm Bureau in 2 years ago as this was happening, and President Zippy Duvall, we were only 2 years into the current Farm Bill, but he commissioned a working group to get together right away with our state farm bureaus, engaging with our grassroots members to try to figure out what was and was not working with the Farm Bill. And on the dairy side, it was especially true. We came out of a record price environment in 2014. Milk prices dropped by 50%. Revenue from milk sales in the United States dropped by $15 billion over a 2 or 3 year period. And we've got about 40,000 dairies in the United States today. You take that $15 billion, that means every dairy farmer is operating with $300,000 less in revenue today on average than where they were a few years ago. So we knew that it was a pretty tough time in the dairy economy as well. Again, that's what led to our efforts to try to do this dairy insurance. That's what's led our efforts to lobby to try to get some key improvements to the margin protection program. We know how bad it's been in not only the dairy economy, but the whole farm economy. So we've got a lot of growers that corn prices are down 50%. That's really hitting folks across the country. We've weathered 3 years now of low prices, so farmers are kind of burning through cash. And I don't know if, even when I travel across the country, I don't know how many folks I hear on a regular basis say, I can't do another 3 years of this. So something has to change going forward. And we do go to the Hill. We go to the Hill quite a bit to talk about the current status of the farm economy, what's happening. One of the first things that when we sit down with members of Congress, maybe even some new members that really don't understand how farm programs work, the importance of farm programs, et cetera, we show them some of these farm financial indicators. And what we've seen is with farm income falling in recent years matter of fact, farm income in 2018 is going to be at a 12-year low. The lowest level since 2006, I believe, and if you adjust for inflation, it's at the lowest level since 2002, net farm income. So it's a pretty tough situation. At the same time, farm debt is reaching record high levels. Farm debt in the U.S. is at $385 billion. One of the biggest drivers of the increase in farm debt is land values and real estate debt. Real estate debt's up over 100% in the last decade. And so that's really starting to challenge balance sheets. When we look at debt to asset ratios, they're climbing. Now, they're not at the levels that we saw back in 1980, but they are starting to climb. Another indicator of farm financial health is called the debt service ratio. Debt service ratios are the measure of how much production you need to service debt, and those are also have been going up for 4 consecutive years. And so when you go to the Hill, you'll often hear people say, oh, it's not that bad because debt to asset ratios aren't as high as they were when we had a last farm crisis. But one of the things that's different today is we've got a lot of debt that's probably not measured in those USDA books. When I was driving down here, I don't know how many equipment dealers or you're financing directly through an equipment dealer. So you have some off-the-book financing that's not showing up in those debt-to-asset ratios. So it may be a lot tougher out there than USDA is actually indicating because we're not picking up all the debt that could be on the books. And so with land prices where they are, there's a recipe when you look at some of the bigger macro issues that could create a really challenging time going forward. And what would do that is continued increases in the interest rate. The expectation is the Fed will raise interest rates 3 more times in 2018. And I was in a conference in Kansas City with a bunch of real estate investment folks, and one of the things that they say, while there's huge demand for land, as that interest rate continues to tick up, there become better places to put that money than in land. And so if we were to see land prices fall, that would further make that farm balance sheet look a lot worse because your debt to asset ratio would erode in a hurry if land prices came down. So these are all things that, when we go to the Hill and we talk to lawmakers, and we stress the urgency of why we need a farm bill in 2018. We can't wait until 2019, 2020. We need to get a farm bill done. The House has released a version of the farm bill, and I'll tell you from my understanding, the House version of the farm bill, every title of it was done on a bipartisan way, except for maybe the nutrition title. And that's the sticking point today. But when you look at what the dairy provisions are in the House Farm Bill, that was done in partnership with the Democrats across the aisle. So we take this type of information and we stress to folks when we go on the Hill that we need to get a farm bill done pretty soon for folks to provide some sort of relief. And we saw some adjustments in the House Farm Bill. I'll talk about those later. That do make some additional changes to the margin protection program. We don't know yet what the Senate version of the dairy title will look like, but we do continue to highlight how important it is to get a farm bill done on time. So those are two of the farm economy, that's a big one. And then the other thing that when I would travel and meet with dairy farmers is competition in the milk case. And we were just talking about this, earlier before we got going. There's so much more competition now in the beverage space than there used to be. When you look at coconut beverages and soy beverage and almond beverage, if you look at the growth rates in those product categories over the last 4 or 5 years, it's only whole milk that continues to see year-over-year changes and improvements in consumption. Skim milk consumption is dropping like a rock, and as a whole, fluid milk consumption is dropping pretty heavily. I think this year, USDA estimates that per capita consumption of fluid milk is going to be less than 154 gallons per person or pounds per person. So it's going to be at the lowest level of fluid milk consumption ever. Fluid milk sales in 2017 were at their lowest level of all time. So declining fluid sales at a time when we're also record milk production year over year means we're putting more dairy into manufactured products and less into the fluid space. And so that means more and more of your milk check is based on those lower priced butter and cheeses and manufactured products and not the high value fluid milk. We have been involved in a number of efforts to try to help. One is the Dairy Pride Act, and we did see the omnibus package include report language that would address dairy products being labeled as imitation, not dairy, but imitation products being labeled as imitation. So Farm Bureau's been supportive of that. One of the other things I mentioned this meeting we're having with USDA we're going to talk about is what do we need to do to get whole milk in schools? Because it's whole milk and flavored whole milk is what folks are consuming. Those are the ones that have the year-over-year increases. How can we get that product to people, get the product that they actually want to them? So we'll bring that up with our meeting with USDA. I think it's going to be a challenge to try to do that. And my understanding is, and I'm not a nutrition expert, but in talking with folks, it seems like the lunch ladies have a certain amount of calories per meal that they need to provide to students. And so I don't know how many calories are in whole milk, but when you take away like a low-fat flavored milk and put a whole milk on it, that means they may have to take some stuff off of that plate. And so that creates a substitution issue. And so that's one of the things that, we're going to talk with USDA to see if there's something that can be done to get access to whole milk in schools. I also had somebody call me and say the California standards, they have standards in California that mean you have to fortify the milk with additional proteins. And so can that be done? And what that would do is use some of the non-fat dry milk that we've got in inventory. We've got a lot of powder in inventory around the country. Having to add that into the fluid milk to get additional proteins in the fluid milk would do a lot for consumption and moving some of those products. So I've had people call me about that. I don't believe Farm Bureau has policy on that. I do recall that it came up at convention. I don't think it was passed, but that's something that I continue to get calls about. And it may be something that to think about as members, is that something that we would support. With California joining the federal milk marketing order most likely here in the next couple of months, they already have that standard in place, so they're one of the largest dairy markets. Looking at that and getting more information may be something we want to consider, because as I'm going to show you guys here in a little bit, it's the world inventories of non-fat dry milk, the record volumes that we have around the world that are really what's driving the low milk prices. Non-fat dry milk it traded below 70 cents this year for the first time ever because of building inventories not only in the United States but in Europe and in Canada. And I'll get into some more details about that, but yes, sir.
Just looking at your chart there, you've got conventional milk, and then you have whole milk, and then you have organic milk. What's the difference between conventional milk and whole milk? Is that just the whole category?
Yeah, that's the whole category of conventional, but I separated out whole milk because that's one that has the most positive growth trend in recent years.
Okay.
But if you were to take that whole milk is actually in the conventional, so I didn't.
Yep, but this is total consumption, but it's not necessarily reflecting the population changes.
Like demographically?
Yeah.
Well, you've seen my next slide, haven't you?
Oh, go ahead. Wait.
I'm teasing. But no, that's exactly right. I mean, demographics are changing in the United States. People are on the go now more than ever. I mean, I still sit down and have a bowl of cereal with my daughter every morning for breakfast, but not everybody does. People are running through Starbucks, grabbing their lattes. Some folks aren't eating breakfast. Just the way people are consuming dairy products has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years. We're eating a heck of a lot of cheese in the United States, but we've also got a lot of cheese in inventory because as people drink less fluid milk, that means we got more cheese, more butter, more non-fat dry milk, more dry whey, more of those storable products in inventory, and that keeps prices from moving up. So I've got a couple ideas on ways we could increase demand for fluid milk, or increase movement of fluid milk anyway to help prices. And I'll talk about some of those a little bit later. But one of the things, and again, I'll cover it in more detail later, the House Farm Bill did include provisions to change the way fluid milk is priced. So right now, fluid milk is the higher of Class 3 or Class 4. So if Class 3 is higher, it's going to be based on the Class 3 price, but if 4 is higher, it's based on the Class 4. There's a proposal in there that was worked on by National Milk and IDFA. Quite frankly, that's the first time those two organizations have worked as closely together on something in the Farm Bill as they did on this one. But it would change the way fluid milk is priced to be the average of the two. And the whole intent behind it is to allow beverage milk plants and those in the beverage milk supply chain to manage risk. That's the whole reason that they're trying to do it. And when you look at these trends and think about risk management, how important it is in today's kind of ag economy, ag and food space, improving risk management tools for the beverage milk space would go a long way to helping reverse that trend. Because one of the things in beverage milk, there's not a lot of innovation in the space because they have there's no way to lock in a price for 6 months, 18 months, 2 years. Forward contracting in fluid milk is illegal. You can't do it. And that's part of the Ag Marketing Agreement Act. So if you're McDonald's and you say, I want to lock in the price of milk in my Happy Meals for the next 2 years, there was no way to do it without exposing them to a whole lot of financial risk. Because if they assumed it'd be class 3 and then it ended up being class 4, they were left upside down in that hedge. And it was very, very difficult. It's in the weeds how all that works, but this fix that they've proposed, or this change in milk pricing, will allow folks along the supply chain to manage risk, do more innovation. If I know what my milk is going to cost, maybe I can roll out some different type of milk beverages, and there's not as much risk on their end that the price would move way out of line. So that would help, and I'll talk a little bit about that in more detail in a later slide. But I think improving the risk management can help slow anyway the decline in fluid milk consumption by letting people lock in price and do some innovative things in the dairy case. That's on my next slide. How are we doing on time? Like, do we have 15 hours to go? Changing demographics. That's another big thing. Millennials, I think I'm getting a little bit too old to be called a millennial. I don't know if I'm a millennial or not. 2000 plus, born in 2000? Okay, I'm not a millennial. Okay, thank goodness. What's that? 82 or younger is a millennial? I'm teasing. Born after 82. Okay, I might be a millennial. Millennials are spending the least amount of money per capita on food consumed at home. Millennials are eating out. They're not spending as much money eating at home like my mother and father did, or like my grandparents did. So this chart shows you just by income gap, and I'll be happy to you've got these charts if you want to share them with folks after the fact. Feel free to do so. But millennials are spending the least amount of money on food consumed at home. Their consumption patterns are a lot different, and that's contributing to the decline in fluid milk consumption. How do we get dairy products in the hands of those folks that are on the go, that are consuming, they're eating at these fast food restaurants, these high-end restaurants? How are we getting milk into their access, into their hands? Is something that I think we need to continue to work on. DMI is doing a lot in that space, the checkoff group for dairy, to try to boost fluid milk consumption. They partnered with Fair Oaks Farms to release that Fairlife milk, and that comes in a variety of different containers and has a very wide distribution channel with the goal of trying to get fluid milk in more people's hands. But that is a challenge, that changing not only in the age demographic, but in the diversity of people, different diets that people may have, is something that is a big challenge to the industry. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Where is Coca-Cola now in that chain of? Because that was when they started doing Fairlife milk. They wanted to build 3 plants in the United States, one on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like the beverage companies were going to start getting into the milk market.
Well, they've got declining market shares in soda. Like, soda consumption is going down just like milk consumption is, as is juice consumption. It's all going down because people are drinking bottled water. But where's Coke in this situation? I've heard anecdotally that they're thinking about building a plant down towards Atlanta, but I can't, I'm not sure. But they're still involved in the distribution.
Yeah, because I think there was I guess the goal, or kind of in the perceived goal, was that's it. That they were going to, they were going to do Fairlife milk, but they were also going to do their own milk at some point. I don't know what they were going to call it. But.
Did you can't need me to repeat the question?
Speak up now.
So Coke was supposed to be, building these plants and, not just Fairlife milk, because that's McCloskey, but, or whatever his name is. But, we're taking more, doing more of this, marketing of the beverage, similar to Fairlife, but,
You mean Coke making a alternative dairy drink?
Right.
I'm not that close anymore to like what Coke is doing, because I used to work for National Milk, but I don't work for National Milk anymore. So I'm not that close to what may be happening in that channel. But I know that like Dean Foods launched like a True Move that's like their signature milk across the country that has the same label. That's one of the things that some of them are trying to do, is have a homogeneous milk product that people associate with to help with fluid milk sales. Because I think I was at a meeting, somebody said, what's the #1 most recognized brand in the United States? Recognized logo. And it's the Coke logo. Worldwide, Coke logo is the most recognized brand. And we don't have a flagship brand in the beverage milk space like that. And part of that's due to, we use checkoff dollars to promote dairy products. So you don't see, that signature dairy brand. It's not like in my grocery store, I see Cabot cheese everywhere. You can get Cabot cheese all over the place. Dankin Farms will mail you a big block of Cabot cheese to your house. Matter of fact, I do that quite often. I get that old school cheddar and pack on the pounds. That's my favorite cheese.
That's the one we don't have tonight.
I'll have to call Bob Wellington and get a special care package sent my way. Good? Have I answered your question?
yeah, I was just, and if we want, I think if we want to increase our milk consumption, it starts in the school. It starts with that generation,
Yep.
because it's not gonna, I go down to my brother-in-law's, and the thing you'll find in his fridge is almond milk. You won't find any dairy. You come in my fridge, you won't find any almond. Well, you will find the almond milk, because my wife has a fridge.
You better be careful what you talk
But
about.
at the same time, I don't know, we drink 5-6 gallons of milk a week,
Yep.
and.
I think that milk pricing proposal may help.
That milk in the schools, because when that, I was watching the old version of 34th, Miracle on 34th Street. So Santa Claus and this other guy were sitting at the table. Guess what was sitting on the table? Yeah, 2 glasses of milk. This is 1947. You don't see that today.
Right.
You see water or soda. You don't see milk.
Yeah. And that's something that, again, I think innovation in the space, being able to manage price risk could help, but it's going to take a while to reverse that trend. But it can happen. I mean, look what's happened with butter. Butter used to be bad for you. Now butter, when you go to restaurants, they're using heavy cream. They're using all the fats. And I'm going to talk about that later too. The consumption of fat has changed in the U.S. Changed the price of milk because of that. But that's, I'll talk about it later. I don't want to spoil that slide that we have coming down the road. But it can happen. I'm gonna start charging you for questions.
So, is there any discussion about changing the way milk is priced?
You've seen my slides. I promise I'm gonna get to all that.
Well,
But there is.
No, I mean, seriously. Milk's been priced on the CME since 1938 or whatever.
It's been priced on the CME since the late, 1999, I think is when they launched the first milk
Changed
futures.
in 1989, but, somewhere, if we could come up with a formula on the cost of production instead of being at the mercy of the market.
Yeah, and I'll get into, that's because that is one of the things that, when not only in my travels and around the country, and but we've had the same federal milk marketing order system for nearly 90 years. We've done some updates to federal orders, but we haven't adjusted milk pricing really since 2000. So is it time to sit back and, look at the market and say, it's time to rethink this? When we first started with federal orders back in, the early, late 1800s, 1900s, they had these, they start to put these marketing things together. But you couldn't put 80,000 milk on a tanker and ship it cooled very far. You couldn't do that like you can today. You can make milk in Wisconsin, put it in a square container and get it down to Florida and sell it pretty quickly. You couldn't do that when we first put federal orders together. So a lot of the regulatory things that we have in place don't necessarily reflect the milk market that we have today. So there is some conversation about, well, do we need to revisit that? I think the challenge is, where do we want it to go? Because if you could end up like the hog industry that has a lot of vertical integration. Cattle has a lot of integration. The poultry business is the most vertically integrated. So I think it's a very tough question and one that the industry needs to think about. One of the things that we've seen just when I travel is people talking about all the new milk that's come online. So over the last decade, we've added 30 billion pounds of milk in the United States. A lot of that back in the upper Midwest. We haven't seen a lot of milk production growth out in California like we did the previous decade. So all the milk that's come online in recent years is really stressing the processing capacity in the United States. And so, I travel to Michigan quite a bit. Michigan used to have one of the highest milk prices in the country and one of the highest milk prices in their region, in that Great Lakes region. Now Michigan milk prices are as low or lower than they are in California because they have so much milk and they've only got one place to go with that. That's south. They don't have a lot of processing capacity. They're hauling milk several hundred miles to find a home. They're selling it way below class in Michigan, and so Michigan dairy farmers are having to do all that reblending. They're getting paid a lower price because of all the new milk that's come online and the limited access to processing capacity. And the challenge is going to continue. So in Fort Wayne, Indiana, they just opened or will open a big Walmart plant. And that Walmart plant, instead of taking all the milk that was in that area, they've lured some dairies into the area to supply the Walmart plant. So that's the challenge we have, that I'm going to visit with USDA next week, is Dean Foods cut all of their independent farmers that were supplying some of those plants because they lost the Walmart business. So they lost that business. Now you've got these plants that are not going to be running at capacity. So it's going to make that processing tightness even more difficult going forward. And it's all because we've had so much more milk coming online in the last decade, and we're going to add even more milk. Just last year over year, 2016 to 2017, we added about 10 million pounds of milk a day extra across the United States. So we had record milk production in 2017. We're going to have record milk production 2018. I believe we're expected to produce about 220 billion pounds of milk this year. You can see where milk production growth was positive. In 2017, it was positive in the Northeast, upper Midwest, western states, Texas, Kansas, etc. Milk production was down in some of the southeast areas and then in California. So just changing milk production, all the milk that's come online has really been a concern when I've traveled the country, especially when I'm in the areas like Michigan and in New York over the last year. And I think we've had additional milk come online here in the U.S., but we've also had more milk come online around the world. That's really what happened in 2015. We had record milk prices. We added cows, we expanded production, but the European Union also took their quota system off. So European milk production grew rather rapidly. So global milk production climbed quite a bit. back in 2015, 2016. And even Canada. Canada's got a supply management system, but Canada milk production's grown by nearly 20% over the last few years, even though they have a supply management system. So globally, milk production continues to outpace the demand, and that's why we're seeing building inventory levels of some of the dairy commodities, and that pressures prices lower. As I mentioned, the non-fat dry milk price below 70 cents for the first time ever, and that's due to global supplies, not only in the U.S., but in Europe. They've got massive piles of powder and inventory, and then Canada is now exporting about 200% more powder than they ever have in the past, because they have so much in inventory as well.
So before you move, Canada, 2006, 2005, looks like they had quite a reduction.
Get better answer than me. I'm standing next to you.
I'm just looking at the slide that it looks,
Canada's one of the lighter colored ones. So the colored box is on the left of the logo.
yeah.
In 2006,
Yeah, I'm just looking at.
I think that's European Union.
Oh, that's the European Union.
I'll send these slides around so that people have. I know it's hard to read. I'm colorblind, so I'm having a really difficult time.
No, it looks like it's Canada for me, but I'm colorblind.
I think it's the EU. Any more questions on this one? So, the big challenge is USDA is projecting that we're going to continue to produce more milk. So we're going to add another 30 billion pounds, 38 billion pounds over the next decade. So we're already in a tight processing environment. What's it going to be when we add 38 billion more pounds of milk? And I was at a meeting in Florida earlier this year, talking with some guys that build cheese plants. They said the biggest cheese plants that we can build take about 300 million pounds of milk, I think a year or something like that, or I'll have to do the math, but basically what it amounts to take that volume of milk, we need to build 10 brand new big cheese plants across the United States to take in all that new milk that's going to come online. And those are $100 million investments to build those type of cheese plants, and it takes several years to some facilities are. Premiums, overwater premiums have eroded significantly across the country. So anywhere in the red, their premium is lower than it used to be. So the premium being anything above that federal water price. So your mailbox price minus the federal water minimum is your premium. And in some parts of the country, quality premiums are gone, volume premiums are gone, and in some places, the premiums are actually negative. So dairy farmers are getting paid $2 or $3 below the federal water price because of all the dumping and reblending and all the challenges that some of the different co-ops have. So premiums have eroded quite a bit. The other thing I've heard is hauling charges have gone up quite a bit. Stop charges have gone up, and so the cost of hauling your milk, probably, I don't know anecdotally, but I'm sure it's gone up. And that takes even more money out of your paycheck when your hauling charges have gone up. And for some of the plants, they've said, oh, well, when we can go to one dairy and get a whole load of milk versus have to stop 15 times. I was just in Amish country, and there are a lot of very, very small dairies in Amish country, but their hauling rates have gotten so excessive that they're considering getting out of the business. Because when they can go, they have to go to 6 or 7 Amish farms to get a load of milk, or they can go and get a load of milk from one guy. And I'll have something on there on economies of scale later. But that's eroding the premiums. You're paying higher hauling charges, and that's a concern in the market. So when we look at just where average milk prices were in 2017, Vermont, your average milk price was $18.67 in 2017. That was the 5th highest in the U.S. But as I indicated, you see Michigan at below $17 per hundredweight. whereas in Wisconsin it's 18.13, Minnesota it's 18, Ohio's 18.40, but Michigan's got the lowest pay price in that region because of their supply concerns. There were some parts of 2017 where milk production in Michigan was up 7 or 8% in a given month, year over year. So milk production was very, very rapid in Michigan, and that led to some of the lowest pay prices that they had ever seen. Florida traditionally has the highest milk price because of the way beverage milk is priced in the U.S. So as you move to the southeast, milk prices get higher, and as you move into the northeast, milk prices get higher. Into some of the, when you get closer to deficit areas, milk prices get higher. But in surplus regions like Wisconsin, they're usually a little bit lower. And here's what I meant about powder inventories. So people are eating more butter, but that means we have more non-fat dry milk to dispose of. And we export a lot of our non-fat dry milk, but we export at those global prices. And so there's a global price. There's not much difference in the price of skim milk from the United States versus Europe versus New Zealand or any other major dairy producer. It's a world price. It is a homogeneous commodity, and we're big players in that market. The reason why we're big players in the non-fat and dry milk product exports is because we can backhaul. So we got to be concerned about this with China, but when they're sending over telephones to us, they got these empty containers they got to take back to China. We can put dry milk powder in it, and so we get a backhaul, so we can backhaul. That's why we're major players in some of those dry dairy product export categories. For cheeses or butters, anything that has to be refrigerated, much more difficult for us to really penetrate the Asian market because you got New Zealand, Australia that's closer. China's invested in railway. They got steel that goes all the way into Europe, so they can put things on a railroad and get it into China and into Asia a lot cheaper than we can for some of those cool dairy products. So we're able to play in the dry markets. We still play in those other markets, and we've got CWT export assistance to help dairy farmers be competitive in those global markets. But the reason why we're so good at exporting milk powders is because of the backhaul and then our proximity into Mexico and Canada. But when you look at when I talk about the powders having that global price, the red here is powder that's in inventory in Europe. Government came in and bought milk powder in the European Union, and it sits in inventory. So it's kind of just sitting on top, keeping domestic prices from moving any higher. So you got massive piles of powder in inventory around the world. So with more powder in inventory, that's why we saw those prices at the low levels, again, below 70 cents per pound, the lowest level that we've seen since federal order reform. So in order to get some real relief to milk prices, we need to relieve some of the inventory that we have in milk powder. And so what we've seen then is in the last, if you look the way milk's priced today, with the federal order system, with the value of butter being so high and the value of powder being so low, we've just focused on the coins. From 2000 to 2014, the fat represented about 40% of the milk price that farmers got, but now with more demand for milk fat, more demand for butters, it now represents more than 50% of the milk price, and with powder prices very low, the powder and the protein component of the milk represents less of the milk value. The chart on the right shows what a 10-cent change in butter, cheese, non-fat dry milk, or whey does to the milk price. And you talked about milk pricing and being based on Chicago earlier. This is really a powerful slide to me because consumers want milk fat. That's what they're demanding. But a 10-cent increase in butter only lifts your milk check by 47 cents per hundredweight. Whereas global demand for powder or global supplies of powder are robust, powder prices are weak, a 10-cent decline in powder is equivalent to 86 cents per hundredweight. So it's not a one-for-one trade-off when consumers are consuming more butter and less of the other parts of the milk. That's why we've seen that big drop in milk prices. In 2014, non-fat dry milk was, at some points in time, close to $2 per pound. Now it's, again, 70 cents. So you take $1 out of the powder price, that's $10 a hundredweight. So if we want to see milk prices improve, we need to see powder prices move up 20 or 30 cents, and that'll push the milk price up to go along with it. But that's, in a nutshell, the end product prices are, that's what drives each of those components, what ultimately drives the milk check. Cheese, a 10-cent change in cheese is about $1 per hundredweight. Cheese markets have been very, very good, very firm. $1.50 to $1.70 per pound, I believe, this year. It's that non-fat dry milk that's the weakest category today. Excuse me. So that takes us into the federal orders. And again, how am I doing on time? I'm good? If I need to rush it or?
No, you're fine.
I put enough in here to go for 16 hours, so just, I might have to take a break and
Might
walk.
be eating around you, but that's no problem.
Well, what time's the spaghetti dinner? It starts in like an hour?
No, 7.
7?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll go until you want me to.
Starts today, so you have to start singing then.
What's that?
Band starts today, you have to start singing.
Oh, is that why you got all these microphones? I thought it was because I wander around the
No,
room.
it's for you.
Well, I'll try to speed it up a little bit, because there's some other pretty important things that I think you guys would probably be really interested in. But the goal of this slide is just, we haven't done federal water price reform in a very, very long time. Is it time to rethink how milk is priced in the United States? You have different economies of scale, and I got that on the next slide, but you talk about, what's your average cost of milk to produce milk here in Vermont? Would you guess?
1973.
1973. That's what you need. What if I told you, I've talked to guys in Kansas that make money all day at $13?
Well, I know, you get outside of the Northeast, you get where you don't have to build the infrastructure, That's why,
Yeah.
when they came out with the FDP, they said $8. I said that doesn't work here in the Northeast because we need 10.
Yep. That's the challenge. And from a policy perspective, how do we have a safety net that reflects, there's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. And that's the big challenge, is that the cost of production is different. The operations are different. You have different challenges in different parts of the country, but we have a pricing system that's based on that national average manufacturing value of milk. So I'm not sure what we can do, but it's certainly something, again, as I indicated very early, I don't have answers, but I just know that this is something that folks in the industry, now that we've got, a farm bill maybe out of the way in the next year, it may be time to start thinking about milk pricing and can we get some real reform to the way milk is priced. And that's a big conversation. It's a conversation that you need the co-ops in the room for, you need the processors in the room for, you need USDA in the room. But we haven't had major price reform since 2000, and we've had a federal order system for 80 years. So thinking about that is just a question. It's just, is it time to think about that? I know a lot of co-ops, their emphasis is on make allowances. Are you familiar with what make allowances are? So what a make allowance is in the federal water milk price formula that they have, they take a certain portion of that out of the milk check to give to the plant so they can make the product because of what they call the circularity. So because the price of milk is based on what the plant's selling the cheese and butter and powder for, in order for them to be able to make some sort of profit, they skim some of that off the top, pardon the pun, and that's the make allowance. And so if you just look on the total, on the right side, for class 3, that's a $3 per hundredweight make allowance. For class 4, as a $2.17 make allowance. The co-ops will say, in order to incentivize us to build those new cheese plants we need to build, or to build new powder plants, that make allowance needs to be higher. But if the make allowance is higher, that means the farmer gets even less. And so, that's going to be a challenge, to have that debate about make allowances and whether they need to be higher, or quite frankly, do we even need them at all? No other country has a make allowance on milk, and that's $3 out of your farmer's checks. And I got another slide. Based on the whole end product pricing formula, only about 10% of the milk that's sold in the United States is captured in those surveys. So there's a lot of other products that we're making that we're not seeing the value of those products. There's not the transparency in them. So maybe think about how milk is priced going forward. It's something to think about. So I'll get into a little bit of the policy dynamic now. Kind of outline the market, some of the challenges that we see in the market. And so when we go up to the Hill, there's really several sides of the balance sheet that we're trying to talk about and work on. The first, crop insurance, farm programs, conservation assistance programs, that puts money in your pocket, helps your overall profitability. What else helps overall profitability is reduce regulations, reduce costs of compliance. So if you have reduced regulatory costs, that's going to make you more profitable. And the third is market access and development. And that's something that I've been spending a whole lot of my time on in recent weeks, is market access and development. That's things like a NAFTA negotiation, steel and aluminum tariffs, what's that impact on agriculture, re-engaging with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So getting access to markets is critically important. We spent a lot of time working on that. We know that 95% of the world's population lives outside of the United States. So how do we get meaningful access in those markets? So those are the kind of three areas in the congressional toolbox that we try to work on to help. I think the first one that we worked on and that was accomplished at the end of December was tax reform. The effective tax rate for farmers and ranchers has come down from anywhere in the 20 to 30% range. It's come down about 6 or 7 percentage points, so that does provide some financial relief to farmers. And then we also spent a whole lot of time, when you do a bill in a partisan way, not working across the aisle, sometimes things are wrong in the bill. And so the tax package did have that grain glitch. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It was a situation where if you sold to a co-op, you could donate or deduct 20% of your sales to the co-op from your taxes. But if you didn't sell to a co-op, you didn't get that deduction. So they made a very, very big mistake. You had ADM and Bunge and Cargill out here trying to set up co-ops in case they didn't fix that tax bill. So it was fixed in the omnibus package, but getting lower taxes and a number of other things in the tax bill is something that did help farmers and ranchers. I think one of the other challenges that we need is immigration reform. We need access to labor. The existing H-2A program does not work very well for dairy. It doesn't work very well for livestock. We need access to year-round skilled employees. And so that's something that we continue to work on. And quite frankly, getting pretty nervous, the champion on ag labor reform will be retiring at the end of this Congress. And so if we don't get something done now, it's going to be real difficult to see something done going forward on labor reform. So that's not my key issue area. I don't work on labor reform, but I know that's something that Paul Schlegel in our office, our Deputy Director of Public Policy, spends more time than he really wants to on labor. Labor is a very, very challenging and sensitive topic for obvious reasons. We can't even agree across all of agriculture on what kind of labor reform we need. But that's something that we at Farm Bureau continue to try to work on going forward. Because for dairies, again, you need access to year-round good laborers. And as President Zippy Duvall says all the time, we're either going to import our food or we're going to import our labor. And so having some sort of common sense labor reform is something that we continue to work on. And Again, I'll give you all these slides in case, you want to go back. And if you have questions, you can email me, give me a call in my office. I'd be happy to talk in more detail about any of these things. The other thing that we've been working on, again, I mentioned this earlier, for 2 years we've been working on trying to get a new farm bill. And so the farm bill it's a 5-year package, but they scored over a 10-year period. It's about $900 billion package over 10 years. 80% of that's going to be in nutrition programs. The other 20% is in your crop insurance, your conservation programs, and your commodity title. And I'll highlight with what we have today, where the farm bill is today, based on where it was passed. We're spending $100 billion less today on farm programs and nutrition programs than when the bill was passed. So I was just on the Hill this week, and one of the things I said was farmers are already saving money. This farm bill costs $100 billion less than when we passed the farm bill. So when we do this next farm bill, we don't need any more cuts to agriculture. We've already done our part. It's saving $100 billion over 10. A lot of the savings is coming out of SNAP. About $90 billion is being spent less in nutrition programs. And the reason why we're spending less on SNAP is because the unemployment rate's at a 17-year low. The U.S. economy has improved, so more people have jobs, don't need access to the nutrition programs, so we're spending less on SNAP. But one of the things that we tell everybody is SNAP is very, very important, not only to the urban areas, like New York or like Miami, but it's incredibly important in rural America. And this is what I mean by that. These shaded areas are the percentage of the population that gets a SNAP benefit. And a lot of people always think, oh, well, SNAP's all in these big urban areas. But I'm from Kentucky, if you can't hear it in my accent. And in Crowley County, Kentucky, it's eastern Kentucky, it's coal area, more than 50% of the population is on food stamps. So it's incredibly important part of the Farm Bill. We support it being a joint part of the Farm Bill, the nutrition title and the farm programs. And we continue to highlight when our members come to town. You may not know it, but I guarantee a lot of your neighbors across rural America depend on this program for access to the foods that we produce. So we continue to stress the importance of the nutrition program. It will be one of the biggest challenges this next farm bill is the potential reforms to the nutrition title. I haven't seen it, but I believe the Senate Farm Bill will be much more bipartisan, probably not propose the type of cuts that we've seen on the House Farm Bill, but nutrition will be a very, very tough issue during the Farm Bill debate. When you take away the nutrition, the other big titles are conservation, crop insurance, and the commodity title. And I spend a lot of time visiting with members of Congress, new members of Congress, who don't understand the crop insurance program. They have a lot of misconceptions on what it is. They think that it's just the government giving farmers checks to go buy insurance. That's not what it is. I've heard, I was in an office, they said it'd be better if we just did ad hoc disaster payments. So whenever it got bad, let's just make payments. Let's not have this crop insurance program. And that'd be a very, very big mistake. So when if we look historically, 1998 to 2001, we didn't have the same type of crop insurance program that we have today. We made very, very meaningful improvements in crop insurance back in 2002. But prior to that, we spent $30 billion in a 4-year period, in a 3-year period on ad hoc disaster payments. That occurred after the Asian financial crisis. Whereas now, with the crop insurance, we're not making those same type of ad hoc disaster payments. We've added 100 million acres into the crop insurance program. We cover over 100 different commodities in the crop insurance program, and we don't need those ad hoc, unanticipated payments. And quite frankly, when we talk to a lot of our friends in agriculture, a lot of lenders say that crop insurance is a very, very important component for a guy to get an operating loan going out. You need to have a crop insurance safety net. So we continue to stress the importance of crop insurance. Both presidential budget blueprints in 2017 and 18 proposed pretty massive cuts to crop insurance to the tune of $50 to $60 billion over 10 years. So we'll work very hard to try to defend the crop insurance program. And now that we have a dairy part of the crop insurance program, dairy farmers have even more of an interest in making sure that crop insurance is protected going forward. Some of the things they've talked about doing in crop insurance is putting a $40,000 cap on subsidies. So that means once you get to $40,000, you don't get any more assistance to buy crop insurance. They've talked about putting an AGI limitation on it, and they've talked about taking away the harvest price option. So all of those be pretty devastating to the effectiveness of crop insurance. So we continue to try to communicate that message. I'm almost done, I promise. So the issues we surfaced on the Farm Bill, number one was, we want to protect Farm Bill spending. We want to see funding at or above the levels that we have currently. We don't want to see any more cuts. And the way crop insurance math works is any new programs that you add, not crop insurance, Farm Bill, any new programs that you add, you got to find savings somewhere else in the Farm Bill to pay for it. So that's a big challenge right now, is we don't have a lot of money to make these programs better. And that's why what Senator Leahy did in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, working with his partners in the Senate, Thad Cochran, to get the MPP fixes into the Farm Bill, created new baseline. It would have been impossible to do that through a Farm Bill. So getting that extra money, that put another $1 billion in dairy's baseline over 10. So dairy, despite being a $40 billion a year industry for farmers, their Farm Bill safety net was equivalent to less than 1% of spending, whereas corn's about 4%. Some of the other crops get a lot more meaningful coverage. So getting that $1 billion put in to the MPP program means not only that we've got more safety net in MPP, but we also have more money this next Farm Bill if the Senate side does something different on MPP. As Colin Peterson has put forward some ideas, we've got more money to be creative at the end of the day. That's what it all amounts to. Without getting that in the Bipartisan Budget Act in February, we would not be able to do much of anything to make MPP work better. So I think a lot of folks in DC know anything dairy related. Senator Leahy plays a pretty critical role in that. So I'll just compliment him, and much thanks to the work that he did in February to help. The others, protect the crop insurance. We knew that we needed to fix the cotton and dairy safety net. That was done in the Bipartisan Budget Act in February. Looking at the other support programs like ARC and PLC, reforms to the Conservation Reserve Program. Farm Bureau supports the CRP working lands. We support the current acreage cap of 24 million acres. One of the challenges that we had when we travel the country and you talk about CRP was farmers say they have to compete against the government to get access to land. The CRP rental rates in some counties are over 100% of the cash rent for comparable land. So we wanted to work to make some key improvements to the Conservation Reserve Program. The House version of the Farm Bill released this week does that. It caps CRP rental rates at 80% of the county average, but we knew that there's opportunities to make some improvements in the CRP program. Yes, sir.
Are you tracking the CRP snafu we have right now that's impacting Vermont? As you go about your rounds?
No, tell me what's happening.
New rule book out on CRP, and is Wendy still here? Our FSA director's here as well, so she knows this very well, but
I'm gonna be in trouble when I get home.
That's come out reflects the rule that was adopted after the 2014 Farm Bill in a very strict interpretation that says any lands that are affected by other conservation requirements are not qualified for CRP. Vermont has a very comprehensive set of new environmental regulations on farms called required agricultural practices, which in essence disqualifies virtually all of the land in Vermont from participation in CRP.
Really?
But we're not the only state that has state laws
Well, I'd be happy to, yeah, let me take that home with me.
There's a push going on, our Secretary of Agriculture has made a good push to headquarters, and maybe we'll fix it.
Well, thanks for surfacing that, and that's something I can reach back out to Joe, and, you know, we've got, our Farm Bill team is tooled up and ready to go, so we can make sure we put that on the radar screen of those. And the other thing, you know, with FSA, I want to, Undersecretary Northey, his first meeting outside of USDA was with our farm policy group, and he's come in, and Bob Stevenson at USDA with the FPAC mission, their goal is to make it a better one-stop shop for everything that you're doing, your crop insurance, your FSA, and your NRCS, all under one umbrella. And I think we've been pretty happy with the farmers.gov initiative to try to streamline things. And so, but with this FSA issue, I'll take that back and hand it over. Don Parrish handles a lot of our environmental issues, so I'll make sure he's aware of what's happening in that space. Yep. So this one is, I don't really need to tell you guys, milk prices are very volatile. So this is milk prices going back to 1980. And so what we saw was prior to, you know, the late 80s, early 90s, you know, we had a dairy product price support program where the government supported milk prices by purchasing cheese and butter and non-fat dry milk. But Congress steadily lowered that over the years. And as that price floor was lowered, milk price volatility increased considerably. We saw the lower support levels, and then in 2000 we had federal water reform, which tied milk prices directly to the commodities. And then now, in this kind of RFS environment with ethanol and more variability on the feed side, milk price variability continues to be all over the board. And that's why access to good risk management tools and affordable risk management tools is so important. And so if we look back at the margin protection program that we got in the 2014 Farm Bill, the blue line is the average margin, or the MPP margin. The green bars at the bottom are any potential payments that were made through MPP. But as you can see, with milk prices and margins falling pretty far from their levels in 2014, MPP didn't provide a whole lot of protection to dairy farmers. The first 3 years of the program, dairy farmers paid in $100 million in premiums and saw about $12 million go back out to them during that 3-year period. So we knew that MPP needed to be changed. And I think what we saw in the Bipartisan Budget Act, and I'll go through a little bit, you know, it does make sense to really sit down and think about MPP. You got until June 1 to look at it, do the math to see if it works for you. But they did make it a lot more affordable. And so I think, again, working with Senator Leahy's folks, they knew that they could do something to help dairy farmers now during this next 6 to 8 month period. They knew milk prices were likely going to continue to get worse. So giving folks the opportunity to evaluate MPP all the way till June helps you have a little bit more information about how much you're going to pay in premiums versus how much you could expect in program payments. And if margins continue to be where we think they'll be over the next 6 months or so, by June, you should know that MPP pencils out for your operation or not. So it's definitely something to give a second look at in 2018. So that's what I have here. So what I did was I've got, I went through, and some of you may have met me in 2014 when I came to Vermont after the MPP was first passed. I was down around the state doing extension education meetings with Vermont Extension, with Pam over there. So I've got a tool that can forecast MPP payments. And right now what we're looking at, because MPP premiums were lowered substantially for the first 5 million pounds of milk. Does anybody in here have a production history over 5 million pounds of milk? For anybody over 5 million pounds of milk, you're going to need to do your math real careful. Anybody below 5 million pounds of milk, the math is pretty easy. The premiums are pretty cheap, 10 to 15 cents. And right now the expectation is if you're covering 5 million pounds, about 42 cents per hundredweight net of the premium, up to 5 million pounds. As soon as you get over 5 million, it starts to get pretty expensive. So I don't know if you can get a lower coverage percentage to get under 5 million, but that's definitely something to consider. What we saw in the House version of the dairy farm bill, and I'll talk about that a little bit, they changed the coverage percentage down to 5%, so you can cover as little as 5% of your production history so you can stay under that 5 million pound threshold. But for anybody under 5 million pounds, do the math on MPP, because it may turn out to pay for itself by April. And so you'll know that it's already paid for itself and that it should be a worthwhile decision. Yes, sir.
So, how long does a producer have to sign up?
June 1.
No, what I'm saying is, what's the length?
It's
Do they
2018,
have to sell?
2018 retroactive.
Retroactive, so you'll have half a year.
So basically,
You have to sign up for 12 months.
yeah, but so the way it is by June 1, we already know what January's margin was. February's was $6.88, so if you had $8 coverage, that's $1.12. March is expected to be similar to February, about anywhere between $6.50 and $7. April's also expected to pay. You'll know February, March, and April's MPP payments by the time you have to sign up. So you'll know 3 months. If you're at 5 million pounds, if those 3 months of payments are more than $7,000, then you sign up for MPP. And the camera's on, you probably turn that off. But that's the case. And we wrote a letter in support of that. So Farm Bureau wrote a letter, said, look, we want you to update that decision tool pretty quickly. The secretary's working on that. We also said we want sign-up to be retroactive, knowing that, coming this spring is going to be a pretty tough environment. So again, we're not saying that MPP as it's currently structured is the right answer going forward for the next farm bill. We do have policy on the margin protection program. There are some things we'd like to see considered in that, like the feed cost or a feed adjuster, something like that. But for 2018, it's definitely something to think about because it can put some money in your pocket retroactively. So you have until June 1 to make that decision. So what did the House do in the Farm Bill on dairy? And these are Colin Peterson on the House Ag Minority Staff had some changes to the dairy provisions in the Farm Bill. And what he's proposing to do, one is rename it. It won't be called MPP anymore. I believe they call it the Dairy Risk Management Program. So that's a good first step. Expands the coverage up to $9 per hundredweight. So right now you can buy up to 8, it would let you go up to 9. So just to put that into perspective, historically, 34% of the time, the MPP margins have been below $8 per hundredweight. 45% of the time they've been below $8.50, and 55% of the time they've been below $9 per hundredweight. The goal, with Colin Peterson's proposal, would make MPP pay more frequently, more timely. It keeps it monthly, but in order to pay for it, in this whole CBO budget environment thing that I indicated earlier, he puts the premiums back on $4.50 and $5 coverage. So in order to pay for going to 9, they had to charge premiums for $4.50 and $5. Adding $1 on top is equivalent to adding that 10-cent feed adjuster that the industry was asking for earlier in the year. So it does make MPP a little bit more attractive. It's still going to be pretty affordable. The way I understand it, the premiums would be lower for $8 coverage. I think right now it's 14 cents. He proposes to lower it to 9 cents. But those are the changes that, for the most part, that Colin Peterson's proposed. I think the biggest thing, and again, this is all subject to change. So we'll see what the Senate has in their bill, and then they'll go to conference committee, and some of these things they have could be changed if we do a farm bill this year. But one of the biggest things is it's a lock-in. So right now, you can change your coverage every single year under MPP. You could go 8 and you can go 4. Under Colin's proposal, if you choose 8, you're locked in at 8 for the whole 5-year period. You can't change your decision every year. It also allows you to participate in MPP and LGM dairy at the same time, but not on the same milk. So you could cover some percentage in MPP and some percent in other programs in the House version of the dairy bill. Yes, sir.
Are they gonna, so are they changing the formula? The feed cost formula?
That's a very good question.
Because the understanding was when the MPP came out, they were thinking about feed prices, you know, and they were thinking at the farm instead of was at the elevator. It wasn't that.
Yeah.
So there was, I know Bob Wellington figured out was if they figured it at the farm, farmers would have got $1.61 more per hundredweight.
So what they've done is they've done two things in the bill that direct USDA, A, to look at a higher quality alfalfa, and B, look at corn silage. It doesn't change the formula, but it says within 120 days or 90 days, USDA needs to provide Congress with a report on how they do that. The last 2 omnibus packages have included additional funding to NASS to get state level corn, soybeans, alfalfa hay prices for all 50 states. So NASS is currently working in that direction, and then there's some language that could create a scenario where you could maybe get higher quality alfalfa and incorporate corn silage. But there's no data series from USDA that's what farmers are paying for the grain. They only have the NASS price received data series to administer the program. But I believe that there are efforts underway to try to get a more accurate representation of dairy feed. It's high quality hay in the top 5 dairy states, I think is what they're looking at. And that's in the House version of the bill. Again, the Senate could have something different, and then depending on what happens out of conference. The other proposal that is not, I don't know where it is in the Senate, but Gillibrand proposed a new safety net for dairy called Dairy PLC. And it would put a reference price for milk at $23.34 or something like that. So if the all milk price fell below, I'm just going to say $23, you get a payment based on 45% of the difference. So exactly like the old MILC program, but having a $23 floor price for milk. And so I think I'm going to go visit with her staff next week to talk about that. The biggest challenge with that proposal is that the program would pay out 100% of the time. Every single month over the last decade, this program would have made payments.
What's wrong with that?
It depends on who you ask. It would have made payments averaging about $3 per hundredweight over the last, since 2015. And in some parts of the country, and not all parts of the country, but like when I go to Michigan, they're like, we don't need $3 per hundredweight because our guys aren't turning off the spigot yet with the lowest milk prices in the country. So that'll mute the market signal that they need to roll back their milk production. And some of them said, look, I don't want to depend on the government for a payment. I want to depend on the markets for my source of revenue. And so there's been some divide about whether that's too high of a reference price. We did have this come up through our policy development process this year, and we amended our policy to support either a margin or price-based safety net program for dairy.